The first important thing that you ought to consider in bladesmithing is the choice of fuel for the forge. Gas forges are expensive and require experience to run them properly, and then there's also the safety hazards to think about when using pressurized gas. Bituminous coal is a mined resource traditionally used by blacksmiths, and it produces a black greasy smoke that has a distinctive odor, and it contains impurities that can affect the quality of the high carbon steels that we commonly use in bladesmithing. Natural charcoal, on the other hand, is inherently kinder to the high carbon steel. It is readily available and can easily be made in your own backyard. Another one of charcoal's advantages are its light, pleasant smell and smoke, and this makes it a pretty good choice for bladesmithing in a city neighborhood. Charcoal creates a more reducing atmosphere in the forge by nature compared to the other fuel choices. This fuel-rich atmosphere is ideally suited for bladesmithing because it doesn't affect the alloy in the steel in a negative way. Natural charcoal is also a renewable resource. So what is natural charcoal and how's it made? Well, essentially it's just burnt wood. We generally build a campfire out of woods that we enjoy cooking on. Almost any species of wood will work. Hardwoods burn longer and softwoods tend to burn hotter and spark less. Natural charcoal lumps shouldn't be confused with barbecue briquettes. Briquettes, like you buy out at the grocery store, are made with a bonding agent that sticks to the blade while you're forging, and that causes excessive pitting, so it should be avoided. Natural charcoal is sometimes available commercially through your local restaurant supplier too. After our meal is cooked, we'll have a mound of wood embers left. Then we spread the coals out and douse them with water to stop the charring process. The water causes the charcoal to break up into smaller pieces. When it's completely cooled, we shovel the wet charcoal out onto a surface where it can be washed thoroughly. We like to use bamboo fencing for this. The bamboo allows us to wash away mud and ashes and other debris. It also allows air to circulate around the charcoal so it can dry quicker. Using charcoal to fuel forges is nothing new. The first forges were charcoal fueled and continued to be so until deforestation became a problem. If you consider all the smiths working in third world countries, there are still more charcoal forges being used than all the other types combined. Most of the great weaponry throughout the ages was made using charcoal fueled forges. From legendary samurai swords to Persian woots. From the awesome African spear to the terrifying Viking skirmish axe. All of them were forged using charcoal burning forges. To sum things up, charcoal is the superior fuel for bladesmithing. Hello, I'm Tim Lively. Welcome to Volume 1 of Knife Making Unplugged. In this video, we're going to show you how to make a knife from start to finish without the use of gas or electricity. Working in this way allows you to become more intimate with the art, more self-reliant in attitude, and more basic in process. You won't have to spend all your money on expensive machinery either because muscle-powered tools are generally less costly. They're safer and they require less of a learning curve to use. Many of the techniques that you'll see here were once used by ancient cultures throughout the world. Most of these cultures have disappeared, but a few pockets of working smiths still exist. And by studying them, we've been able to piece together the past and relearn the basics of bladesmithing. Now, if you're a beginner, this is really helpful because the shop setup is extremely easy to put together. So let's get started. So far you've seen how to make charcoal for fuel. Now you need a way to burn that fuel. One of the easiest and most versatile forge designs to build is the ground forge. It's little more than forced air being channeled into a campfire. On one end we have an antique champion blower made around 1900 for blacksmithing forges. They made over 1 million of this model alone, and most of these are still in usable condition. You can find something similar at an online internet auction or ask around at your local blacksmith get-together. A bellows will also make an excellent air supply. The piping goes straight down here to a T-fitting that we're using as a tweer. Above the tweer opening, we've laid down some rebar to form a grate. They're just some short pieces that can be removed easily to clean out the tweer when necessary. We've created a berm around the whole thing to keep the fuel in. Since we'll be using this forge for hot cutting, we have a heavy plate laid flush with ground level. The copper discs protect the face of the plate from the chisel. Having everything at ground level eliminates the need for extra holding devices. An excellent resource for high-quality knife-making steel is leaf springs found on US-made cars and light trucks from the 1950s and 60s. These years of leaf springs are an alloyed steel called 5160. As a professional knife maker, I've used a wide variety of steels, and 5160 is the best combination of edge holding and toughness that I've found. Leaf springs are in a hardened state and nearly impossible to cut with hand tools. By heating them up to non-magnetic, you can easily cut them as you see here. This method is known as hot cutting. If you simply cut the steel with a chisel, it will leave an ugly scarped edge. To avoid this, you can just cut 3/4 of the way through. Bend it away from the cut and quench the thinned area with water. Then just break it off. This leaves a cleaner cut that requires less filing.
Yep. That's good. There we go.
That works.
Ready? Ready. Ready? Yep. 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 One more. Okay. One more. Give it a bend. Yep. Stop lifting up. That works well. Gotcha. So did it.
In smaller areas, you may find it easier to cut completely through.
One more. Yeah. That should be good. Smaller than it? Yeah. Good. Flip it over. Ta-da. There we go.
Now that we have our stock cut to size, we bury them in hot ashes and bring them up to non-magnetic so they can be annealed by slowly cooling. After they've annealed for several hours, they become soft enough to clean up with a file. I manufacture and sell these forge kits as you see it here. It's specifically designed for knife making with a row of holes in the tweer. Check out our website for more information. You can attach it to a stand to keep it contained as a unit so it will be portable. We're using lumber because of its convenience, but a more permanent choice would be a non-flammable material. Now you'll attach an extension pipe to the coupler so you can add the air supply. This pipe can be as long as you like, whatever you feel comfortable with. To make the connection between the extension pipe and the blower more airtight, you can use duct tape as a gasket. Once this air supply is connected, you'll be ready for the next step, which is applying the adobe. Adobe is a mixture of sand and clay. We throw in 2 handfuls of wood ashes per 5-gallon bucket. The ashes give the adobe enhanced refractory qualities. This amount of mixture will be more than enough to finish the forge. I like to keep some extra on hand to cover the tweer holes when needed so I can tailor the size of the blast. Try not to get your mix too wet so it won't lose its shape while you're forming the sides. And be sure to pack the adobe firmly, shaping the walls so that they slope down from the top edge to the tweer, leaving plenty of space for the charcoal and the blade material. It's a good idea to leave it alone for a while so it can set up and some of the water can evaporate. Afterwards, you'll find it holds its shape easier. If you notice any cracks forming, just add some water with your fingers and smooth it out a little bit. When you're all finished, remove the end cap and clean out the inside of the tweer. Once the adobe has dried fully, you'll be ready to fire up the forge. Flame edge. It just needs a light turn of the blower, get that wood going. Take first fire a little slower so it won't crack all the bits on us. charcoal, not smothering it. Once that wood gets burned up and the charcoal catches, the smoke will go way down. That sound is what you're after, that jet sound, if you pump it real fast, it gets higher and almost disappears, but if you just barely crank it, you can just barely hear that jet sound, and that's what you want. But you really don't need to crank this thing fast. All you're really doing is keeping the jets open, the holes in the tweer. This is barely cranking it. As you can see, this little blower, it's Champion's smallest model, I think. It's a little aluminum one. It's very simple. I picked this one up for $25, so they're readily available out there. And it's plenty to do this job. And this forge is big enough to forge up to, full-size camp knives. So we got a chunk of steel going here. Might as well throw it on there and get some heat going. I'm going to work on the tip first, but I'm going to try to get a lot of the blade hot so it has plenty of residual heat built up behind the area I'm working in. This homemade charcoal is going to have little pieces of twigs and stuff in it. It's no big deal. You just got to watch out for rocks. You don't want to get any rocks in your forge. Dirt clods or anything like that. But little pieces of wood or grass or whatever is no big deal at all. So now this forge it's going good. It's fired up. It just has to settle and build up a nice hot base of coals under it, and keep some fuel. You want to keep about 2 inches of fuel between the surface of the tweer and the bottom of the blade stock, the material that we're using, the high carbon steel. In this case, it's the leaf spring from a 58 Ford half-ton pickup. Right now we're just letting the fire build up and just really not ready for the blade yet, but why not have it in there? It sure ain't gonna hurt nothing. There's still some moisture in the adobe. I mean, it was only yesterday that this was made, so they dry out pretty fast when you use just a little water to make the adobe, but it will crack and we will have to patch it a little bit, but it's no big deal. The more you use it, the better they get, because the surface of the adobe litrifies and it gets real white looking, so it hardly ever cracks once you get to that point. But It's a, you know, it's a fresh forge right now, so it's going to go through some changes still. Now what we're looking for in this steel is to bring it up to a non-magnetic state. I've got an old broken speaker magnet clamped in a pair of vice grips that I use to find non-magnetic. I just kind of keep there on the side. Now, if you don't keep fuel on top of the steel, it doesn't want to heat up. So you can use that to your advantage by leaving a piece of the steel out of the fire without being covered up, and that keeps that area relatively cool. Whereas the point that I've got a little bit buried right now is heating up pretty fast. Once this forge has been used, you know, several times and the surface is litrified, these things will heat up a lot faster too. It's just this first heat that takes a while. And I want to find non-magnetic, and then I want to go a few hundred degrees higher than that actually, to around an orange colored heat. We're in shade, it's full sunny day outside, but we've got we're inside this Ramada type thing, and it lets some ambient light in, so we've just got kind of a generalized shade. So you go for this orange color without burning the tip off. And just kind of work this tip a little bit. Keeping it flat as you can, kind of straight. Just getting them corners tucked in just a little bit. You don't want to let it bulge out too extremely, because then you'll have ears when you beat it back over, and you don't want that. So you slowly beat them ears in. And then once the color's out of it, about like it is right now, you've run out of heat. I mean, it's still plenty hot and everything, but you'll put too much stress into the steel if you work it at this heat for too long. Especially when it's thin. When it's thick like this, you might get away with it, but once it thins out a little bit, you run the risk of breaking your thinned areas, your tip or your edge or whatever. So I took that out way too soon, but hey, gotta get a feel for everything. It's a new forge and all. Guess I should mention I'm wearing some safety glasses, obviously, a hat to keep stray sparks off my head, and a long sleeve shirt, cotton, to prevent sparks from landing on my forearms. They still do. And cotton pants and full leather boots. You know, just generally protect your skin, your eyes. Every now and then you smell your beard on fire. You got to kind of pat that out. So friends nearby, I tell you. So now we want more of an area than I had heated up that first time. We want it into the blade quite a ways, so that we have some residual heat built up that'll back up my work area with heat, so that the heat will last longer. But you got to watch your tip, because it'll heat up faster than everything else, as it is. So what I'm doing is I leave it uncovered. That'll lessen some of the heat right there in that position, and it'll push the heat back more into the area I have covered. This looks like a much better heat than the first one. So you kind of play with the fuel. Well, notice I'm not really cranking a lot. This is an easy turning blower, so it's no... The only time I really have to go fast is to kind of clear out the ashes. I'd say this one's ready to be on. So what I was doing there is, before I lost all my heat, was I was kind of taking away the little squareness that I had to it and just kind of blunting it over, and then it's pushing itself into the steel, which bulges it out on the side. So I'm also hitting in with a direction more like this to push that metal in. Otherwise it gets a lip to it, and when you hammer on that lip it folds over on itself and creates a cold shut, which you don't want to happen. So as you're hitting it in this direction, it flares it out somewhat. It's also pushing it into the steel too. Then you lay it down and kind of give it like a 90-degree hit like this to push it more into the steel without it lipping over. So you get another good heat going on it. Kind of give it a knock on your anvil to get some of the scale off. And you just do what you did the first time. Giving it somewhat of a bevel. Straighten it up here and there. Grab it the other way with your tongs, and before you lose all your heat. So I got kind of a spear point thing going at the moment. That'll change. So I'm just flattening out the ripples that I created, and I've lost my color, so I stop. You can tap in the corners a little bit once you get into this black heat, but because it's still kind of thick, but you don't really want to do that much. Not real hard or anything, or especially when it gets thin. Okay, so it's still fairly straight. I've got me a tip going. Okay, that looks good and hot. Now we take it over to the anvil. Work on this tang just a little bit. This will take several heats. I'm just getting it down to a workable size so I can grab it with my favorite tongs. So it'll draw out. back in there. Keep doing that for several heats. Keeping a couple inches of fuel under it and keeping it covered also, and that'll heat up that tang area. Grab this metal like with these tongs like this, so it kind of backs it up along the edge. Works out pretty good like that. That way you can hold it up like this when you're hammering. You'll get a gutter going down the middle. You got to kind of flatten that out, otherwise it'll cause stress in itself. So you just keep that up. Put it back in the fire, heat it up. Eventually we'll get it down to something usable, something that'll be easy to grab onto. Remember, keep it covered after you put it in. Oops. Fresh stuff. See, this forge is working real efficiently already. Even though it's been freshly made, it's firing up real good. It's doing exactly what we need it to do. You can see, look at that, it's already probably up to non-magnetic. Touch the magnet to it and it doesn't stick. See, it's already up there. Where here it's sticking. But down here it's past, it's way out. All you have to worry about now is burning it. And burning it just takes experience of knowing when to stop. It's usually like at a yellower color or a buttery color. But this is a good forging temperature already. It's well into the forging range. Just like to get it nice and soaked. So there's plenty of good heat there. But that's ready to be forged again. Back over here. It doesn't seem like you're doing much for quite a while, then all of a sudden it's there, so just keep working it. I just like to keep it a little straight, close to straight anyway, as I'm working it. Close enough. And repeat. You can see we're getting a little handle looking thing going on there. This would be a nice big buoy or a small camp knife, one or the other. Okay, we go to the anvil again. You can see it's really moving a lot better now once you get it down smaller. Keep that gutter out of the middle. Kind of working on your taper at the same time. Keep them corners tucked in, that helps a lot. Get the little kinks out of her. Okay. Now, you can see I've got a good handle going, and you probably noticed I was using the edge of my anvil here, like that. This little area right here is rounded over slightly on the anvil, so I kind of use it to create a stop or whatever as I'm forging on the tang. And you just keep drawing it out. I'll leave it to about where it is right now because I want to use these tongs to hold it. These are just a pair of modified bolt tongs, and they just kind of wrap around the tang a lot better, so I can work on the blade end of it a lot easier now. Okay, now I work the bevel. I'm just kind of concentrating on the tip for right now. And I use the edge of my anvil, you'll see, hitting it with a slightly diagonal approach to it. And I just kind of start something. I'm just really deciding where my tip is and my edge is going to be. I'm still keeping it really thick, keeping everything straight. I'm just getting it set up for a counter bend that I'm going to do next. Okay, I use the rounded side of my hammer to counter bend this thing. And then keep it flat. Alright, that's a nice little counter bend. Okay, up here, just flatten out what I've, get the kinks out of it. It's still pretty warm. Okay, so I start my bevel just lightly. The other side, kind of do it evenly on both sides. And that wants to flip the blade, the tip of the blade, upwards as I'm working. I also kind of work the back to keep it from going all the way up, and that'll be my taper also. Don't want to get that tip too thin. But I'm just beginning my bevel. And you pretty much do that all the way up in here, wherever you want to stop your edge. And you do it a little bit at a time. You can see it only goes up the blade, you know, like a ½ an inch at the most. And then the next pass might go up a little bit further and a little bit further and a little bit further. And I kind of shoot for having a ridge, you know, where I would stop my bevel about 2/3 of the way up the blade. I pinch the back in a little bit too. And this is all kind of, you know, several things are happening at once. You know, I'm tapering, which it's really not going too tapered yet, but you can see it's gently starting to taper. Still a little fat right there. You know, I just work out them fatter areas, and so I'm tapering and beveling at the same time, and watching how much of this curve I'm taking out. So I've almost lost all my counter bend now. The back's almost straight back here. So I want to start really concentrating on tapering this back. Okay, I want to show this hammer. One side of it's slightly domed and one side of it's flatter. So this one's more to push the metal around and this one's more to take out the bumps and dips. And it's just a standard 4-pound sledgehammer. After you've forged for a couple hours, you ought to stop and take all the stress out by annealing. Annealing is just bringing it up to non-magnetic or a little bit past and leaving it covered with some fuel so it'll all turn into ash. And leave it in there for at least a couple hours, and then you can take it out and let it air cool from there to about room temperature. Then you can heat it up and reforge, but you've taken out a whole lot of stress that you've built up along the way. You can work this back away from the tip too to help you taper out. Using the edges of the anvil can really help you for this whole area. Okay, so most of the major forging is pretty well done, so now I just need to straighten it all up, clean up any little areas that need attention, but mostly it's just getting it nice and straight at this point. Just a little smack here and there ought to do it. Okay, all of your forging is pretty much done now. The edge and the tip, all the tapers are kind of where you want them pretty much, and the tang has been stretched out, and you probably saw I forged a little finger choil area in there, and it's pretty much done right now. So we want to bring it up to non-magnetic, the entire blade, and let it cool overnight, slow cool. We'll put a little ashes on top, a little fuel that will turn into ashes, and that'll allow it to slow cool overnight and take out all of its stress that we've got built up into the steel's microstructure. So then tomorrow morning we'll soak it in some white vinegar, and the white vinegar will eat off all the scale, and we can take a look at it and see what we've got. You know, we can see if there's any touching up that needs to be done with the file, or a little bit more hammering. You know, maybe the ridge needs to be a little bit cleaned up or something. Whatever it needs. But right now we're pretty much done, and it's very straight. So we just want to take all the stress out of it, so that we can clean it up and take a look and see what we got. After the blade has been soaked for a few hours, the scale can be easily sanded off with some 100 grit cloth. This is 5% white vinegar like you'll find at your local grocery store. To make the vinegar even stronger so it will work faster, you can put it in a freezer, and the part that doesn't freeze is a more concentrated solution. You can make that part even stronger by warming it and adding salt, but I usually just use a regular strength. Okay, after you've soaked it in white vinegar and you've removed all the scale, then you can smooth out everything over with a file and just true up your edge and take the high spots off the back and sharp corners off the tang or whatever else it needs. I filed a little semicircle here with a chainsaw file just for a choil to you know, as a starting point for my edge. You know, just little things like that that you think is necessary to make it look the way you want it to look. But after that, it's pretty much ready for heat treating. But first, I'm going to introduce you to my wife Marion, who's going to show us how to do some sand casting, and from there she's going to show us how to do some fittings for the handle.
I'll be using the sand casting method to make an ingot of coin silver for the fittings. Coin silver is an alloy of 90% silver and 10% copper. We could just use the silver by itself. It looks good and all, but it's a fairly soft metal. And since we'll be using it on a knife that could get scratched or marred easily, we'll add the copper in, and that'll make it a harder metal and give it more wear resistance. I'll be using 9 parts of 999 fine silver. I got this from the local coin shop in town. And I'll use 1 part of pure copper. This is from electrical wire because it's known for its purity. This method of sand casting requires a 2-part frame. This part of the frame is called the cope. It has the pins in it. And this one's the drag without the pins. You'll need a nice flat surface, and you'll lay your drag down first and get it nice and flat there. And then pack in some of this special sand casting sand that has oil in it, and it holds its shape whenever you're using it. Just get plenty of sand in there and pack it down really well, and then smooth off the surface so you get a nice flat surface to work with. It's real important that it's nice and tight too, so it doesn't fall apart on you when you pick it up. Clean out your sprue area so you don't have any problems there. I'm heating my model so that whenever I lay it onto the sand casting sand, it'll heat the surface of the sand and harden it so I won't have any problems during the pour. Just lay it in place. And put my cope on top of that. Pack in some more sand. Okay, now that you've got your top part packed in nice and firm, you just smooth that off. Make sure everything's nice and firm and packed in real good. If we did it right, when we pull this off, it'll come out nice. We'll be able to take the model out of there. Looks good. That out there. Put this back on top of there. Wire it back together. And we should be ready for the pour. Okay, I've got these two pieces of sheet metal that I'm going to put on the outside of the frame before I wire it together. This will help hold everything together and keep the sides from busting out whenever I do the pour. Okay, I've got the metals in the crucible now, and they're heating up. And as soon as they start to change color, but before they melt, you need to add a little flux. Flux reduces the oxidation and lets the two metals flow together more cleanly. Just add a little bit. I use 20 Mule Team unscented borax for this. So it looks like we're almost there. Just give the crucible a little jiggle so you can tell that it's liquefied. It looks liquefied. And just remember, when you get ready to pour, whatever you do, don't stop, because you need a continuous flow as you're pouring it into the mold. Okay, now we need to take the wires off and get it out of the mold so I can quench it in water. When I quench it in the water, this is going to anneal it so it'll be easier to work from here. Coin silver is work hardened, and since I did all that hammering on this to get it to this shape, I need to soften it again. So I've heated it up, and I'll just quench it in the water, and this will anneal it so it'll be softer and easier to work with from here.
just cutting off some bar stock, some 1018 mild steel for material for the butt cap and the guard. Putting some adobe in the forge to cover up the tweer holes, and that'll choke down the size of the forge, and it'll be more efficient for fuel consumption, and it'll also make it a little easier to find my workpiece instead of losing it in a large size forge. This will all just scrape right out when I'm finished with it. Okay, now that we've got the guard pretty much situated where it's going to go, we need some handle material for it. And for that we're going to use this Sonoran Desert Ironwood that we have here, and we'll cut it up with a bow saw. It makes pretty short work of it, and that'll get it down into like sizes about like this. And from there we cut it up even further into just a slightly oversized chunk, and you can clean it up with like one of these 4-way rasp file type tools. And so it's just a little too long, a little bit too thick and all that, and we'll drill a couple holes the same size as our tang on the end like that, and also a couple holes where the tang is wider up here on this end here, and then they'll meet in the middle, and we'll try to file out the excess in the middle and chisel out the corners and everything to get a nice snug fit. Got one of these emergency camping saws that you get at an outdoor supply store, and they work really good because you can cut one end off and get it inside the hole, and then file out the walls in between each hole, and that makes it a whole lot easier to chisel it out after that. Yeah, I took a chainsaw file and stuck a handle on the end, and ground the end to almost like a screwdriver type tip, only it's sharpened. So that lets me just get the rest of these walls out pretty easily in between the holes that I drilled. You can get really accurate for a good tight fit like this too. Just slowly work along, and eventually you can just whittle it all out of there to the shape you need.
I made a seamless silver ferrule for the front of the handle, and I'll show you how I did it while I make the one for the back. And then the butt cap just goes up against all that. I've chiseled off a piece from my ingot and cleaned up the scarfed edges. Now I'm going to flatten it into a sheet. I'm using the edge of the flat side of the hammer to push the metal in the direction that I want it to go. I'll just keep hammering on it till it's about 1/16 of an inch thick, and then I'll flatten it all out till it's nice and even. Once you get the piece flattened to about this, you'll work it down, smooth it out and everything, and then use your tin snips and work it down, and also with files, till it's just under 1/8 of an inch larger than the base of the handle right here. And you'll just scribe around that, and that'll be your reference point from here. I'm hammering the edge of the silver sheet to flare it out, and it just takes moderate blows with a small hammer. If I used a larger hammer, this would upset the metal and push it into itself, but the smaller hammer just lets it flare right out from the middle. As I'm working this edge, this flared part starts to get hardened, but the metal inside here is still soft, so it just flares out from there. Okay, I've got this hammered down to about the size that I need. Okay, from here I need to take this inside part out up to this edge here. So I'll drill a hole first, and then I'll use my jeweler's saw to take it out from there. So just stay kind of close to the edge, but don't get too close, because you can always file it out with some small jeweler's files afterwards. It's better to stay away from that edge and not mess up your band, and then just work it out of there later. Okay, now that I've got that out of there, I can just clean the rest of this up with the file. Be sure and use your soft jaws on your vise, and the round file works great for this. Just keep working it till it gets just about flush with the inside of your bevel that you have. I've drawn a reference mark around it, and I'll take my file and file that down until I create a step, and that's where the ferrule will sit. I've got the wood notched out the way it needs to be, And the ferrule just fit right up over that, right into place. But first I need to clean it up and get the oils off of it with some mech, and then I'll epoxy it into place. The handle and all the fittings are finished except for the final touch-ups. Be sure to leave plenty of tang sticking out so you can peen that over during the final fit. But right now we're going to take all this off because the blade needs to be heat treated.
First step in the heat treating process is normalizing. Normalizing refines the grain and sets it up for further heat treatment. To do it, you bring it up to non-magnetic and you go about 200 degrees past that. And you want a nice even heat, and then you pull it out of the forge and you point it at magnetic north and let it air cool to about room temperature, which is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. You want to normalize 3 times. So after this cools, I'll do it 2 more times, and then we'll be ready to proceed with further heat treatment. Now the blade has been normalized 3 times, and I've put it back into the forge, and I'm annealing it by just bringing it up to non-magnetic and leaving it in the forge. And I'll let it slow cool in the forge overnight, and this will relax the steel completely and take all the stress out of it, and then it'll be ready for quenching and hardening. Okay, now the blade has been annealed overnight and we're ready to do the hardening step. I've brought the blade back up to non-magnetic again, and I'm going to pull it out and quench it into this tank of automatic transmission fluid. Now when you quench it into the automatic transmission fluid, you don't want to move the blade side to side, because that can cause warpage. You can move it a little bit up and down like this, but not side to side. In fact, you want to move it a little bit up and down so that it doesn't make a clean line of hardness across your tang. This way it'll taper the hardness on your tang. And you want to hold it in there for at least a couple minutes till it's all the way cool. And we triple harden, so you need to do this 2 more times after this. Okay, after it's been in there for a couple minutes, let the excess automatic transmission fluid drain off of it. And then just throw it in the dirt, get the rest of the tension off of it. Okay, after you've done the hardening step and you've cleaned all the automatic transmission fluid off, you need to take some 100 grit emery cloth and just clean up the blade and shine it up down to the bare metal. I mean, it doesn't have to be really shiny or nothing like that, but you just got to be able to see some bare metal. then when we go to the tempering stage, we can see the colors appear on the steel. But before we do that, we check to make sure it hardened up real good. And to do that, I take a chainsaw file and go along the edge, and as you can tell here, it just skates right across. If it actually bit into the steel and removed some of the material, then you'd know that it didn't fully harden. But it should skate across it like glass, like that. We got a really nice fully hardened blade now. So now we're ready to temper it. Okay, for tempering, we stick it in the forge, the hot forge, and I start with the tang. And I'm just letting through conduction the coals heat up the steel. And I'm going to be tempering it 3 different times. So what I want to try to do is I want the end result to be a blue tang, a blue back, and a bronzed edge area. But since I'm tempering 3 times, what I do is I temper it until I get a light straw color in the edge. I let it cool to room temperature. Then I go for a dark straw in the edge, and then let it cool to room temperature again. And then I go to a bronze color. Now it's good and hot right now, so it's heating up. It takes a while for it to take effect. But you have to pay close attention, because all of a sudden you'll start seeing those colors move. So you move it around a little, and you can already tell that, see, I've got some blue right there in the tang. There's a very light straw going right there. But I want to make sure I get this whole tang blue first. And you can get really selective with this tempering. Okay, I'm getting a good blue color in the back now, and the straw is starting to creep up towards the edge. Keep it moving around so you don't get anything too hot. You can get really accurate with this technique and get your selective tempering exactly the way you want it. Make sure you flip it around and look at both sides instead of just one side, so you make sure the colors are evenly creeping up the edges, or the sides I mean. Now I've got a little bit of straw color right there already. Edge is still pretty hard. So essentially what I'm doing with the tempering is drawing out some of the hardness, so it'll be able to be sharpened easily, and it won't chip when you're hacking away at some hard wood or anything like that. So a good way of figuring out what kind of temper that you need is just by practicing and getting out and experimenting with different edges. And the way I did it was taking it to whatever colored temper that I try all different kinds of temper colors, but I'll go to, say, a light straw, and then I'll go hack on a piece of ironwood for 10-15 minutes or something, and then I'll look at the edge with a 8x loop and some strong light, and under the loop you can see whether it chipped out or if the edge rolled. So if the edge rolled, the temper is too soft. If it chipped out, the temper is too hard. So you want to get it somewhere in the middle where it won't roll and it won't chip. And with this 5160 steel, I have found that about a bronze colored edge works about the best for me. So that's what I'm going for, but experiment on your own and see what you like. And different steels will perform in different ways, so you might want to use a different temper on 01 tool steel than you would on 5160. Okay, can you see those colors?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's creeping up there. It's a slow way of doing things, but it's very accurate. Okay, now you can see I've got some good blues and purples going into the back. I've got a good light straw color up here, and I like to get my tip a little bit blue down here because it's really a weak spot in the blade. You know, you dig at a knot hole or anything and you can, and it's pretty brittle if you're not careful. So I like to temper these a little bit softer on the tip. And the tang, of course, is blue, and I go into a dusty gray, which is even softer than the blue temper, because I don't need any hardness in the tang at all. So I want it to be really strong. Now I'll let this cool to room temperature, and I'll put it in again until I get a darker straw. Then I'll pull it out and let it air cool again, and then I'll go for a nice rich bronze color throughout the edge, and that'll be tempered nicely. Okay, we're on our third tempering now, and I'm just about happy with the thing, and I've almost got a bronze color just where I want it, and I've got a little bit more of a, I don't know, magenta type color going towards there. So the hardest color would be light straw, and then a little bit softer would be dark straw, and then softer bronze, magenta, light blue, dark blue, and then to finally a gray color. And then there's lots of little shades in between that. But that's about where I like it. It's got a bronze color along the edge, a blue to purple on the back, and maybe just a slight bit of magenta in the tip, and a dusty gray in the tang. So that's the heat treating process. In carbon steel that has been fully annealed, there are normally two constituents apart from impurities such as phosphorus and sulfur. These are the element iron in a form known as ferrite, and the compound iron carbide in a form known as cementite. A certain proportion of these two constituents form a matrix or mixture of alternating bands or layers. Now this matrix of layers looks like mother of pearl under a microscope, and that's where it gets its name pearlite from. When fully annealed high carbon steel is heated above its lower critical point, which is around 1333 degrees Fahrenheit, the pearlite matrix begins to dissolve and the alternating bands mix into each other. As this temperature increases, the matrix completely disappears into a solution known as austenite. The upper critical point, which depends on the carbon content of the steel, is where all the pearlite plus any excess ferrite and cementite have completely dissolved. If you slow cool the steel from here, the ferrite and the cementite would separate into layered bands again and form pearlite, and that structure would be annealed once again. If you cooled the steel rapidly, like you do in quenching, the austenite would transform into a structure known as martensite. Martensite is a hard and brittle structure and would need to be tempered from there. And you can do that by reheating it up to, well, above 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And that would create a softer and tougher structure known as trustite. So that's the basic metallurgy of the heat treatment process that we just performed on the blade. Now we're ready for the final assembly. Okay, I cleaned all the pieces up with mech to degrease it. You can also use denatured alcohol or another product similar. And I epoxied everything with 2-ton 30-minute epoxy, all the surfaces, and then slid them all back onto the tang, and it all oozes out the seams of the parts. So I'm just kind of wiping off most of the excess, and then I can peen this tang over, and that'll compress everything into shape and hold it into place while the epoxy dries. But pretty much the epoxy is just a sealer and fills any kind of little voids that are inside the handle. But the tang being peened over is what actually holds everything together. So I just use a ball peen hammer, a small end, and then just moderate taps and that'll flare out the tang, because it's still soft. It hadn't been hardened. So the tang will flare out, mushroom out, and create a little button, I guess, on the end of the butt cap, and it'll just hold everything together and compress it.
Now that the knife has been sharpened, it's ready for a sheath. So the first thing you need to do is make a pattern like I have here. First you start with the center line. This is going to be your center reference, and it needs to be a little bit longer than the overall length of the entire knife. So once you've gotten that down, you take your knife and lay it with the back on the line, and then roll it over to one side. Then you'll take your pencil and draw a line about 1 inch larger than the outside of the edge of the blade. And once you get that line done, you'll put it back on here and roll it over to the other side. And do the same on this side. Once you've got all those lines drawn, you'll need to make your the lines for the belt loop. And to do that, just move over from the center reference line about 1/4 inch. This is a pretty big blade, so it's got an extra large belt loop. So I move over about 1/4 inch here and start this line. And however wide you want this to be, you just make your other line. I usually measure this from here and up here so that it's the same. And then this will fold back behind and get sewn down, and that'll be your belt loop. So I'll cut this out, make sure it fits properly, and then we'll be ready to cut out the leather. I always like to try the paper sheath on the knife before I actually cut the leather out, just to make sure I got everything the way it needs to be. And everything looks good. I don't know if you've noticed that I cut this extra long at the end here so I can make a lanyard hole down at the bottom here. But that looks good, so we're ready to cut it out. And I use 8 to 9 ounce tooling leather for my sheaths. And I always write the word outside on the outside of what's going to be the outside because, you know, occasionally I've laid it down the wrong direction and you end up with a backwards sheath. So it's a good idea to do that until you get used to it. So you lay it out there and trace around it, and you're ready to cut it out. I just use plain old pruning shears for this. They seem to work really well. Wherever there's going to be a fold in the sheath, you need to make a groove in the leather. Just take away some of the leather with the grooving tool like this, and this will let the leather fold easier. I'm going to make another one on the back side here where the belt loop will fold over. I used contact cement and glued the belt loop down, and then I stitched it. And I've also cut the welt out and put glue on it, and it's about ready to be put together now. Right down here I made a notch in the welt, and that's going to be our drainage hole, because I'm going to make a lanyard hole there, and that'll just go into that. So I put the knife in there so I know where to push it down. And just start pressing it down where it needs to be. Once you get it all together like that, take the knife out. Use a wooden mallet like this and just pound down where the glue was so it stays nice and tight. Now the glue will hold it together and while we stitch it, so we're ready to do that next. I used a marking tool to trace around the line that I made where the stitch is going to go. And then I'm going to use a hand drill here and drill a hole right here where the rivet's going to go. I use an inexpensive import drill press without electricity. I use the lever to push the needle through the leather. This doesn't take much muscle and it gives you a nice straight stitch, just like a machine but without the high cost. I use heavy-duty waxed nylon thread. Just thread the needle and then pull through at least 3 times as much thread as the area to be stitched. The stitch process works the same as if you were using a hand awl. Just push the needle through, catch the loop, and pull it tight. I finished up the stitching and tied off the ends inside the rivet hole that I had, and I put in my copper rivet and pinned it over, and then I trimmed off the excess on the edges and finished it up with a wood rasp like this and some sandpaper. So now it's ready to be tooled. So I finished the edge with a black edge dressing and applied an antique finish and sealed it with a paste wax. So now it's finished.